Hey, welcome to season 2 of HailChatter, where weather meets restoration. As we are well into hurricane season, we're going to kick off the first podcast with a 2025 hurricane forecast.
And Taylor, this is a great episode. So, HailTrace's CEO Derik Kline was able to give the forecast live with an exclusive audience. So, if you guys want to join us for some of these exclusive recordings in the future, make sure to follow us on all forms of social media.
Absolutely. Now, in this episode, we break down the 2024 season. What is El Niño and La Niña, and what should we expect this year and why? Derik breaks all of that down for us. In addition to this podcast, you can enjoy a podcast every other 2 weeks. So we call this 2 weeks on Tuesdays. Enjoy the forecast now, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Well, so 2025 hurricane forecast. So a couple of things that we're going to do as we kind of go through this forecast. One, we're going to have some trivia in here. So if you haven't started chatting with us yet, now's maybe the time to go ahead and do that. We're going to give away some swag items. So we've got some t-shirts, some bracelets, some hail squish balls. We've got some koozies and cups and stickers and all kinds of fun stuff that we're going to give away. I've got 3 trivia questions, so you need to be ready for those when they pop up. I'll read the question, and the first person to get the question correct in the chat. So timestamped, you're the first one that pops up. Amy will get your information from you, and she will mail you a really cool swag box with all this fun stuff in it. And I think that will be a lot of fun. So a little bit about me. Again, I've been married now. I need to change this because it says almost 20 years, and it actually is 20 years now as of May of this year. So I've been married for 20 years. I have 4 kids, and there is my entire family on the right there. I love racing and I love weather. I'm actually on the road for racing and weather almost year round. For one of those 2 things, whether it's in a hurricane or chasing tornadoes or at a racetrack somewhere. I'm the founder of HailTrace. We started HailTrace back in 2010, and it was really just birthed out of a love of weather. Love weather more than I would say just about anybody I know, but I'm sure Taylor and some of the other people in the office might challenge me on that. But I love weather a lot. And as far as I know, we are the largest hail tracking company, but we also have a big focus on wind and tornadoes. In fact, we do a lot of work for FEMA when it comes to tornadoes and high wind as well. So we employ 17 of the world's best meteorologists, right? We have 17 meteorologists on our staff full-time. They only work for HailTrace, whether they're doing research or marketing or video stuff or tracking storms. We really cover the gamut with the team of meteorologists that we have. They're exceptional at what they do. And like I said, I would claim that they are the world's best meteorologists. We also work in the roofing, insurance, and government spaces. Now, I got into this industry because, like I said, my love of weather and really my love of storm chasing. So my storm chasing career actually goes back to 1999, where I saw my first tornado, May 3rd, 1999. That's the tornado right there on the right side of the screen. I've chased around 350 to 400 tornadoes total in my time storm chasing around the country. Been in 21 different states chasing tornadoes or hurricanes. I've been in 13 hurricanes, potentially another one this year, 2 Cat 5 hurricanes. I've been in hail that would break 47 different state records. So 47 of the states, the hailstone that I literally have picked up with my hands was big enough to break the state record in 47 different states. Some big time hail. I've seen the largest tornadoes in U.S. history and also the strongest tornado in U.S. history. So May 3rd, 1999, wind speeds measured at 319 miles per hour. And then El Reno, Oklahoma, May 31st, 2013, 2.6 mile wide tornado in El Reno, Oklahoma. Absolutely wild. In addition to that, though, I also freelance and storm chase for ABC at times when that comes in. And obviously chasing the media. The media loves to chase hurricanes. And I always love to show this video We won't even go into who it is, but maybe you can comment if you want to. But this is sometimes the media, with me being in the media, you might think, well, maybe they're going to kind of fluff things up a little bit. So here's an example of what not to do if you're in the media here. So we've got this is actually from Hurricane Florence. I chased Hurricane Florence. This is one of my hurricanes. So made landfall with winds, I think about 90, but check that out. Rocking back and forth in the wind like you can't stand there, and these guys are walking with their hands in their pocket in the background like nothing's even going on. Probably some other storm chasers, and I think about the time the wind did get pretty intense in Wilmington at one point in Hurricane Florence, but at this point the hurricane had kind of sagged to the south of Wilmington, and they were out of the eye wall, and it really began to weaken too. It had been on shore for several hours and really kind of began to weaken there. So this is my example, though. So just to kind of prove to you, I'm not in that same boat. This is in Louisiana, and this was a Cat 4 hurricane, so a little bit stronger than Florence, but the wind was also quite a bit stronger here. And I think you'll be able to, I don't know if you can hear it. I'm not a small guy, though, 6 foot, about 190, 200 pounds. So for the wind to be able to hold me up, I'm also a weather nerd, which means I'm not the most athletic person in the world. So I don't have that athletic ability to lean forward like that and not fall without something holding me up. And then you can see walking off there, the smile on my face says, all you need to know how much fun that was. Now, so there is a right way to stand in a hurricane, and there's a wrong way to stand in a hurricane. So in this particular video that I just shot here, there was nothing downwind of where I did this at. So you can't see to the left there. So when I come off, there's a large building right there, like a big concrete, like I think it was an academy maybe. So the hurricane wasn't doing any damage to that building. So we used that to shelter ourselves from the wind. But then when you walk out into the wind, it was just a big field as far as you could see. So nothing, no debris or anything like that could hit you. However, I have seen storm chasers that didn't follow that rule. So this is in Hurricane Laura in Lake Charles. And you're going to see a lot of glass. This is actually the Capital One building. I say was because it was completely demolished. So this was a much stronger hurricane than the one that I also stood out in the wind in. This one nearly a Cat 5 hurricane, 5 miles per hour from it. And some might even argue that it probably was a Cat 5 hurricane with the amount of damage that it did in Lake Charles. But this was the Capital One building. I think it was about 21 stories tall. And it completely, they had to demolish the building. They imploded it. But what I want you to do is watch this video, okay? So you can see there's our lead meteorologist, John, commenting there. And you can see, look at all the glass coming out of this building here. And what's going to get crazy though is this somebody decides that they want to walk across the road and they want to do what I did, but in front of this big glass building. So really, really, here he goes. You actually see him just barely see him down there at the bottom walking across the road. I think I saw him. Maybe I didn't see him. I think this is the right building. Hopefully I grabbed the right video. I may have just teed it up. You can see just how wild this is. I'm going to fast forward this. There he is right there. So there's our guy. Oh, sorry for the language, everybody. And there he goes. Sorry for the language there, but you can see definitely dangerous. So this guy actually cut an artery in his ankle. Okay, so very, very dangerous these hurricanes can be, especially when you're in the eye. And these winds are 140 miles per hour. Definitely not something you want to walk out into, especially when there's a lot of debris that you have to deal with. So first trivia question. After we've done some fun videos, what letter of the alphabet has the most retired hurricane names? I'll give you an example. So A, Hurricane Andrew is a retired, there will never be another Hurricane Andrew again. So that is one letter A that has been retired. But what letter of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, right? So which ones of the names have the most retired names? So I'm going to kind of shrink this down just a minute so I can see what people are saying here. Anybody? I see lots of people. Hurricane Harvey. I was in Hurricane Harvey actually, and what's it called? Not Lake Charles, Corpus Christi, Rockport, for sure. Anybody? What letter? You can literally just throw out a letter like B if you wanted to. B is the wrong answer though. Letter I. There it is. I see it right there. That's it. That is the correct one. Big Brumpo. I don't know who that is, but yes, the letter I. And why is that? Why is that the case? Why does I have the most retired names? And what it really boils down to with the letter I, it boils down to the concept of it. Typically, we get to that letter I name somewhere in the month of September, which is also the peak of hurricane season. That's when the conditions are the most favorable in the Atlantic Ocean. And so we tend to have stronger hurricanes around that. So you're also, the other letters around I also see more retired names. Typically A is fairly rare because usually we use up the A name in June, and it's really difficult to get a really powerful hurricane in the month of June. Andrew was unique in that we didn't have Hurricane Andrew until August. So we had gone, in 1992, we had gone all the way until August without a named storm. And it ended up being a Cat 5 hurricane when it made landfall. But like this year, we're already through C, so we're waiting on the D name now. And we didn't retire any of those other names this year. They were all fairly weak tropical storms. Some of them didn't even make landfall. Although, is it Barry? Was that our B name? Was it Barry, I think? Actually responsible for all the flooding in Texas. So it was no longer a tropical system at that point. But the remnants of it made all the flooding issues in Texas. So anyway, so I can't change my username. I like it. I don't know what it means, but I like it. All right, so we'll go back to the presentation here. Again, we got 2 more trivia questions. So Amy will get your information from you, and we'll get that swag box sent there on that first one. So we'll go back from the current slide here. So the 2025 hurricane forecast, that's what we've got next on the agenda here. So we're going to talk about it. So let's look back to last year. Last year, a fairly active season that we had. So we had 18 named storms last year. You can see, again, if we kind of go back to, what we said earlier about it's hard to get a really strong tropical storm. This last year, actually, it worked out the opposite. So we had Alberto in June, but rare case in June and then early July, Beryl became a Cat 5, I believe. Taylor, is that right? A Cat 5 hurricane? I think so.
Yes, yeah. It became a Cat 5 hurricane very, very fast. It was one of the first, if not the first, earliest Cat 5 hurricane in the season. So I think that was like back in June, maybe early July. It was kind of a fish storm. By the time it made landfall, it was not a Cat 5 anymore.
Yep. What's interesting about Beryl is, so it became a Cat 5, went through the Leeward Islands. You can see it. It's actually down here, this purple one that goes across the Caribbean. So it went through the Caribbean as a Cat 5, made landfall. It weakened as it got close to I think it made landfall in some of the small islands there. It got very, very close as a major hurricane. It didn't actually make landfall, but it was close enough that it did some damage in Jamaica, and then it made landfall on Cozumel and Cancun as, I want to say, a Cat 1 or Cat 2 hurricane. I don't remember exactly. It had weakened some, went across the Yucatan Peninsula, became a tropical storm, and then at the last minute intensified back into a Cat 1 hurricane, made landfall with winds around 80, 85 miles per hour, and actually ended up doing a lot of wind damage to the trees in Texas and made several tornadoes. So Beryl ended up, while it wasn't just this crazy impactful storm, it was a pretty impactful storm for the Atlantic Ocean when you go all the way across. But the really unique thing was how quick it became and how early in the year it became a Cat 5 hurricane, the earliest ever, as Taylor said. So, but we had, again, several hurricanes. We had a tropical storm Gordon. I chased a tropical storm Gordon a long time ago in Florida, so that one's recycled back through. So it won't be retired either as a tropical storm. Helene, major impact, Category 4 hurricane at landfall in the Florida Panhandle, and then caused just catastrophic flooding in North Carolina. Tons and tons of damage. Milton was another Cat 5 hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, but rapidly weakened as it came on shore in Florida. They called it a Cat 3 at landfall. I was in Hurricane Milton. It's up for question. I think, again, a lot of damage, doesn't take away from the damage that it did, but the highest winds I saw right on the coast, right in the eye wall, right in the most intense part of that hurricane, were around 100 to 105 miles an hour, which would put it at a Cat 2. So and I felt pretty comfortable with saying that one was a Cat 2 hurricane. But obviously they're going off of hurricane plane information, which, by the way, if anybody's got me a ticket in the Hurricane Hunter, send that ticket over. That is on my bucket list. I guess I had some stuff here. 18 named storms, 4 majors, Beryl, the earliest Cat 5, 5 hurricane landfalls in the U.S. That's kind of wild. So you had Beryl. Let's see, I'm trying to remember what the one was in Louisiana. I do not remember which one landfall. Then we had 2 of them landfall in the Florida Panhandle, and then Milton. So active season for sure. Landfall frequency. So I always like to talk about this when we do the forecast. Where do hurricanes make landfall the most, or tropical cyclones, really, for that matter? And you can see, so all the areas that are hot, that are orange or red, those are the locations that get the most, and the blue are the locations that get the least. Some interesting things on here, right? How about like Nantucket and Long Island? They get more landfalls than Georgia. Bet most people didn't realize that. But what's interesting, it's the shape of the coast, right? So typically when a tropical system is headed towards in the general direction of Georgia or the northern part of the Florida Peninsula, they're usually making that bend back up and around the bend, and kind of makes you wonder how the coast got that shape. Maybe it's from a lot of hurricanes making that bend and kind of creating that shape some. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sure looks like it a little bit to me. But those hurricanes make that bend, and it's really difficult as they're curving to the north to get back wedged up into that little gully there of Georgia. And so, but then as the landmass comes back out into the Atlantic Ocean, you can see we get a lot more hurricane landfalls up in North Carolina. Obviously, the southern Florida Peninsula, I always say, just sticks out like a sore thumb. It's just sitting out there saying, hit me. And it does. It gets hit a lot. And then you've got, again, another bend in. I call it the armpit of Florida. I'm sure there's a real name for it. But also that bend in creates less hurricanes, although we've had a couple in that area last year. So that those numbers will bump up. This is a little bit old on that. And then you've got, again, Louisiana sticks out. So we've got this next location where we see that. And then as the Texas coast bends back down to the south, we also see an increase there where that bend back to the south occurs. So all these areas, they get hit. It's pretty common and usually tends to hit the same areas over and over again. But obviously you can see Miami, that area, the most likely location to get hit with a hurricane in the U.S., followed by the Cape up here in North Carolina, and then out here on the delta of Louisiana up towards New Orleans, the Fishbowl. So yeah, those are some of the spots. So as we look at the hurricane forecast, so we know where hurricanes tend to frequently hit a satellite, because this is the most important thing. So let's just look at what's going on right now. And to be honest, there's not a lot. There is not a lot going on out there right now. So we do have some disturbances. We've got one that was being watched. It had a really low chance of some formation, but so far not a lot to it. It's moving towards the Leeward Islands here. We'll enter into the Caribbean Sea over the next day or two, and we'll watch it. But as of right now, it doesn't look like anything's going to form. And then we still have disturbances coming off of the Atlantic Ocean. We'll get into why currently we're not too concerned about any of these of actually forming. The other things that you'll kind of want to watch in the tropics, especially this time of year, is you can get these frontal systems, and this will switch, and we'll see this happen again as we get into September and October as well. We'll get these front systems that will kind of stall out here across Florida, and we'll get this disturbed weather, excuse me, and sometimes this disturbed weather will spin up into a potential tropical system. But as of right now, not a lot of convection. We did have an area about a week ago that kind of bent around Florida, but it just stayed too close to the coast to actually form, and then moved in, created a lot of rain, but that was about all that came of that particular system. So everybody's like, man, we haven't had anything. We've just had the 3 little tropical storms. Absolutely normal. This is a look at where we see most of our, in fact, I always say, some people say August 1st to October 15th. I'm kind of an August 15th to October 15th guy, but August 1st, August 15th, somewhere in there, that is when we start hurricane. We get hurricanes, but we don't really get storms until we get to August 1st or August 15th, wherever you want to put it. And then it is a rapid climb all the way up to September 11th or 9th. I always get the 2 days mixed up, to the peak, and then a rapid decline back down, rapid decline back down to October 15th. And then we kind of just ease out through November. So usually the second half of October, not a lot of activity. But the first half of October can definitely get pretty wild with some really intense hurricanes. Time for trivia. What is the record number of named storms in one season? What is the record number of named storms in one season? Let's see what we get here. Record number. Let's see here. Gotta wait for the answer. Just throw in a number. It could be 10, it could be 25. Not the season number, so not the year, although 2004 is not correct. But what is the record number of named storms? So you should be throwing out a number like 15 or 17, or so. Like last year was 18. So if you think last year was the record number, we had 18 named storms last year. So what's the biggest number that we've ever had? Was it last year? Is it a different year? 20. Good guess. Good guess, Heather. 20 is not correct. You need to go higher. Give them some hints. Oh, there it is. Gary got it. 30. Oh, Kenny just barely missed it, Kenny. So close. So close. So close. So it is 30, believe it or not. 30 hurricanes, or tropical storm names. So that's hurricanes, tropical storms, major hurricanes in one season. We went all the way through the alphabet. We had to use the Greek alphabet in that particular year. Maybe some of you can guess the year. Can anybody guess the year? That's getting ready to show up in my presentation, but anybody want to guess the year? We'll throw in another swag box if you can guess the year. What year had 30 named tropical systems? It's fairly recent. I assume everybody that's watching was alive when this happened.
Everyone should remember this.
It's fairly recent. It was a wild year in general, though, for a lot of reasons.
So while they're putting in their answers for the year, do you want to tell everyone what happens after we go through all of the letters of the alphabet? So I think we use 23 letters. We don't use all 26. I think we skip X and maybe Y. So what happens afterwards?
So after we use the alphabet, we go to the Greek alphabet. And so
Alpha, beta.
It's alpha, beta, and then I don't really know the Greek. If you
I know. I think we got at least all the way to delta. I remember getting delta.
Yeah. So I think they used 22 names, so it would have been 8 after. So whatever the 8th Greek letter was is what we made it to on that particular year. And Madison got it right. So the bonus trivia question, which we're going to send out a swag box because we can. 2020 is correct. I didn't have a question for that, but that was just a fun little bonus So let's go back to the presentation now. One of these times I'm going to hit start from the beginning and we're going to have to go through all the slides again. So, okay, so there are three things that are going to influence our hurricane season this year. Okay, so the first one is what we would call the ENSO, or it's all about the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so it's so down here where you see where it says warm and wet, and it's kind of red and bluish colored. An El Nino is when this part of the Pacific Ocean is very warm. So the water temperature, the water temperature compared to average is above average in this part of the Pacific Ocean. And typically what that does, now this doesn't work 100% of the time, which is what makes weather so much fun, because why have a rule that's perfect? So can make it very difficult to do these forecasts, right? But typically when we're in an El Nino pattern, you get more hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean. So you'll see more hurricanes up along the Mexico coast. San Lucas, the Baja Peninsula, you can get more hurricanes making landfall in that area. And that's typically because the water is warmer in that part of the Pacific and the vertical wind shear is less. Okay, and that's one of those additional ingredients that we have to have. So we want to track this. And if we're in an El Nino, we tend to see fewer hurricanes due to strong vertical wind shear in the Atlantic Ocean. So it doesn't necessarily relate to the water temperature in the Atlantic Ocean. It's usually because there's a lot more wind shear over the Atlantic Ocean, which allows for fewer named storms. And so that's El Nino. And then the opposite is La Niña. And La Niña would be when that same part of the Pacific Ocean, this kind of bluish brown color, is cool and dry. Okay, so the water is colder than average. And then that leads to less hurricanes in the Pacific Ocean because we have strong vertical wind shear and colder water temperatures, and more hurricanes in the Atlantic Ocean because we have less vertical wind shear with the trade winds that happen in that part of the ocean. So again, not a perfect rule. It doesn't work all the time, but it's just a good rule of thumb. If you're in a La Niña, expect more hurricanes. If you're in an El Nino, expect less hurricanes. So what's the forecast say? So currently we are neutral. A bonus. So we're right in the middle of nowhere. We're in no man's land right now. And so that's basically where we're at currently. However, we're currently forecasting that some things are going to change. Okay, so we expect that this neutral is going to go to either a neutral or a La Niña. Okay, so it's going to be close. So we're not expecting like a record-breaking La Niña to form, but we are expecting equal chances of being in a La Niña or being in a neutral position. Now, what we got to be careful with is when do we, if we tip over into a La Niña, at what point does it happen? So these letters at the bottom they stand for June, July, August. So what we do is we take a 3-month average to put this together, but we do it 12 times. So it's a rolling 3-month average. So then we've got July, August, and September. So remember, August and September into October are typically going to be our stronger hurricane months, right? So those are the months that we really want to pay close attention to. And then we've got August, September, October. So those are our key months, right? So this is really the bar. This third bar is the one that we really want to pay attention to. So we've got a greater than 50% chance that we'll be neutral in that time period, but almost a 40% chance that we'll be in a La Niña, and only about a 10%, really less than a 10% chance that we will be in an El Nino during that key time frame. But the September, October, November average, look, it's almost 50-50. So, which is still, again, a key part of the hurricane season. So I thought this information was really, really cool. So what we're looking at here, those same time periods, right? December, January, February. And then right here is kind of your breakdown of when the main parts of hurricane season happen. So I've got July through September, August, September, October, November. If it is gray, it is a neutral status. If it's red, it's an El Nino. And if it's blue, we were in a La Niña in that particular window of time. But then you can kind of see how the whole year stacked up as well. Now, what did it look like for hurricane season? Well, in 2013, we had 14 named storms. That was a neutral year. Then we went to El Nino, and look at there, we had 8. And then we had 11. So 14 is average. So we had 2 El Nino years, both of them below average. I will say I think 14 is probably a little bit low on the average now. That's the average up through 2020. I would say that we're probably averages, and some of this is because we can name storms better than what we used to. Some of it is because we've had some active periods, but I would change the average just a bit because of our ability to name storms. Because of the satellite era, we're able to see things that we couldn't see in storms way out in the Atlantic Ocean and name those where we couldn't name them before. We've also had a more active pattern, but that goes for the average, right? So we expect more active and less active patterns. But if we can name storms better, that's going to lift the total number. So maybe it's 15 or 16 as average. We'll have to kind of watch that. But back then, those abilities weren't quite the same. So we go to La Niña and we bump up to 15 and then 17. And then we go back to El Nino. We drop a little bit, but still at 15. So this would have been at the time a slightly above average hurricane season and a little bit higher there in 2017. And then 2019, we were in a neutral status, but coming out of an El Nino. So we were kind of dropping. We almost made it into the negative numbers there. 18. And then 2020, we swung into a La Niña. There we go. We talked about that. That was a 30 season, the all-time record right there. And then 2021 La Niña was 21. But then there's your outlier, right? Still in a La Niña. We've been in a La Niña for 3 straight years, and we had 14 named storms. So just average, or maybe even slightly below average in 2022. Although we still had some pretty significant landfalls. But again, 14 named storms. And then look at that. There's your next anomaly. We went to an El Nino, and then we went back up to 20 named storms again. And then last year again, 18. We were very near a La Niña, but right at neutral to slightly La Niña there. And so far this year, we're at 3. So that's where we stand. I thought this data was really, really unique. You can see most of the time, the rule applied, right? If we were in an El Nino, we had below average. If we were in a La Niña, we had above average. But the 2 outliers would be your 2022 and 2023 seasons. Those are the ones that they just didn't want to play against the rules. So interesting. So the next part is we need to look at the shear. Okay. So when we look at the shear, we want to see low shear. Okay. And what this chart is showing, I love this chart. So this is the Caribbean Sea. So we're looking at the Caribbean, and I'm going to look at the Caribbean and the Gulf, mainly because those are the areas that are going to impact the U.S. The most. But this is the shear in knots. And so the lower the shear, the more likely we can have tropical systems. And the blue with all the dots, so the blue line is the average shear at that moment. And shear is going to go up and down as weather patterns move through, right? So as a storm system moves through the Caribbean, it's going to increase the shear. And as the storm system moves out, the shear is going to decrease. We just kind of want to track the average, and that the gray areas show, so the light gray would be on the top end, and then the light gray on the bottom would be really, really weak on average. And the average amount of shear in a tropical year would be that dark gray line. Okay. And what we notice is so first of all, is that we were in a El Nino during the spring of this year. And what I noticed is that the average amount of shear over the Caribbean was above average, which makes sense. We would expect above average shear in the Caribbean. And the other thing that you can kind of take away and you can learn from this chart is that the amount of shear drops as we get to September, right? So why is August, September, and October the peak? Well, on average, the amount of shear over the Caribbean drops, and it drops to its lowest point I'll be darned, right on September 11th, right when we get the most hurricanes. So we're going to keep monitoring this blue line because overall it has stayed up, but it tends to be looking like it's trying to fall fairly rapidly from late June, early July. It's really dropping right now, which would be a key indicator of the drop down that we're currently having with the amount of shear, with the drop down from El Nino to La Nina that we're seeing, or going into that neutral. So we'll see how much that drops down, but it's definitely something to watch. Same chart, just for the Gulf of Mexico. Gulf of Mexico, a little bit closer to average, okay? So maybe slightly above on the shear, but again, the shear drops lower much quicker in the Gulf of Mexico, which is why typically we get named storms in the Gulf of Mexico in June, not anywhere else. And then it stays low all the way through mid-September, but then we actually increase shear in the Gulf of Mexico in October. So you got to be careful in October of getting storms kind of sheared apart. But again, we're near average to maybe slightly above average in the Gulf, which again would line up with us being in a El Nino. But again, transitioning, that drop we're seeing is that transition into that neutral and potentially into a weak La Nina. So
hey, Derik, before we go on to before we go on to like water temperatures and sea surface temperatures, we did get a great question. Why does higher shear decrease the probability for tropical storm formation? Is it just destroying the structure of this?
That's you actually answered your question. That is exactly the reason why it doesn't work. So what's interesting is a thunderstorm, a severe thunderstorm, we want more shear. That actually tilts the thunderstorm and allows the inflow to continue to pull in a warm influx of air. A hurricane actually breathes in under the hurricane and then exhales through the eye and out up through the center. And so when you have shear, it tilts the eye and doesn't allow the hurricane to exhale out. And so it creates, so like your wind column should be quick, straight up and down. It tilts it like this. So you have wind here, then no wind, and then wind here. And so it just breaks it up. Essentially, it wouldn't allow it to form to a real strong intensity with that. So great question. And that's, so what we want to see is so like when we have really strong hurricanes, we're typically looking at shear in like the 5 knots. So like hardly any shear at all. That means the wind speed from the bottom of the ocean to the top of the atmosphere is basically the same all the way up. And it's also in the same direction. So that's the key.
One way that I like to describe this to people is think about like a pot of boiling water. You know how it boils from the center? Well, hurricanes are warm cores, so they also kind of rise like that, like Derik was explaining, rising from the center and going out. Now think about if you take your spoon and you stir that boiling water, you totally lose that boiling from the center and moving outwards at the top. So that shear is kind of like you stirring things up and it loses formation. Derik had a much more meteorological answer than I did.
I like yours better. I'm gonna have to steal that one. So, great question. And yeah, interrupt me because I'm looking only at my slides, so I can't see the chat. That's why I always minimize it whenever I do the trivia questions, so I can see the answers. But so yeah, please keep chunking your questions in. That was a really, really good one. Okay, so we've talked about El Nino or La Nina, and why it's a key and kind of where we're at and where we're headed. We've talked about wind shear. And it's interesting to see that the wind shear is lining up with what we would expect to see with the pattern that we're in, with El Nino transitioning, that El Nino that has transitioned to neutral and is potentially trying to transition to a very weak La Nina. So those patterns all transition. The question, of course, is will it get to La Nina? And that's the best meteorological answer you can give is 50-50. And that seems to be about where we're at. So now let's look at the water temperatures. Okay, so this is the average of the last 30 days. So interesting is, first of all, you can see it's below average down here in the Pacific, which would be typically a La Nina. So below average on the South American side and above average on the Asian side. And so that lines up saying that we're kind of getting close to being in a La Nina. We still have a little bit of warm water here close to the South American coast. So that's kind of what we're watching. And this has been a trend upward. So we're seeing this kind of trend towards that La Nina. But the other interesting thing is, and again, the water temperatures in the Atlantic are not tied to El Nino or La Nina, but most of the Atlantic currently is below average, which is why we're not highlighting a lot of those areas way out there in the west. It takes a lot longer for the water out there towards Africa to warm up, and it's also below average. So that chain of storm systems that we saw coming off the African coast, they're coming out over cooler water. And so it's going to be really difficult for those storms to develop. But we do have above average water temperature in the North Atlantic. So North Carolina, almost down off to the coast of Florida. We're kind of near average in the Bahamas, below average in the Caribbean, but above average also in most of the Gulf of Mexico. In fact, that below average area in the Gulf of Mexico could partially be because of Tropical Storm Barry. It went right through that area, and it will actually overturn the water and create a cool pocket. So this is what our water temperatures look like. What does that mean for where storms form? So what I've done is I found a chart. I love this chart because this chart will break down where do hurricanes typically form and make landfall. What parts, when on the average, when this is what the water temperatures look like, where do we see the most activity in the Atlantic and the Pacific on this? But here's where we see it. So red would be above average, blue would be below average, and white would just be kind of neutral. And so what it says is Florida kind of doesn't see a lot of stuff when it's like this. That doesn't mean that the water temperatures won't change, but Florida doesn't see a lot. Louisiana sees more, and North Carolina would see more. And we would see a much higher concentration of storms that just kind of call them fish storms, but they go out towards Bermuda. And maybe the Bahamas see a little bit higher activity. Cancun, Belize, down in there, yeah, more activity there. South Texas, potential, but really the strongest signals that I see on this, I see, and you kind of have to understand what it's trying to tell you, is that we're going to see more storms making that bend and trying to swing out, which would put North Carolina coast more into play. And then we're going to have to watch that secondary area of the Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama coastline as being an area. And this is solely based off of water temperatures, but those would be the areas that we really kind of have to pay attention to. All right, the last trivia question. How many major hurricanes have made landfall in North Carolina? Major hurricanes, landfall in North Carolina. So you're going to give us a number. It's in the history of North Carolina. Remember, we looked at the chart of landfall locations. North Carolina kind of stuck out, right? So they had a lot. Gary said the Gulf of America. I actually thought about that whenever I did that. The chart I grabbed had the Gulf of Mexico, so I just put the Gulf. I knew somebody was going to say something though. Over the history as long as we've been keeping records. This one actually surprised me. Maybe a little bit of a hint. It wasn't as high as I thought it would be. So I'll give you another hint. Florida has had 37 major hurricanes make landfall in Florida. Now they have the most. But North Carolina is not the most. It's not the second most either. It's not the third most either. It's actually the fourth most. Interesting to see. What are they going to say? You just throw out a number. You might get it.
I feel like we need like the, is it Jeopardy music?
56 is too high. 28 is too high. 14 is too high. Too high. And then when they get, it's too low. So, nope, 21 is too high. 10 was too high, so it's got to
Wow.
be below 10. If I'm wrong, it's because Google's wrong. I didn't know the answer either, so 9 is still too high. 9 is too high also. There it is, 7. Isn't that crazy? I would have thought it was much higher. They've had a lot of hurricanes make landfall, but they're typically not major hurricanes. What kind of goes into that is the Coriolis effect actually starts to kind of stretch the hurricanes out the further north they get in latitude. You also typically have cooler water further north. So there's just a lot more. So it's not uncommon to get a hurricane all the way up there, but they're typically falling apart. What was the one that Florence? Yeah, that was the one that we had earlier, right? So Florence was a Category 4 hurricane, a really, really strong hurricane out in the Atlantic Ocean. But as it came towards the coast, it slowed down, but it literally just weakened as it came towards the coast. There wasn't like a huge increase in shear. It was just the cooler water. So it weakened from, I think I want 130, 135, something like that, 140. I don't remember what the max intensity was, down to 90 miles per hour at landfall. And it was weakening pretty quickly. So it ended up being a high-end Cat 1, still a landfall, but ended up being a high-end Cat 1. Dorian's another example. Dorian was a Category 5 hurricane in the Bahamas, made the bend, clipped North Carolina, but landed as a Category 2, I believe, maybe a Category 1. So a much weaker hurricane as well. Got very close to the South Carolina coast, but actually made landfall right on the Cape out there. So interesting stuff. Louisiana, I think, has had if I remember right, was the second most major hurricane landfalls. So it's Florida, Louisiana, Texas, and then North Carolina was fourth on the list of major hurricane landfalls. So fun facts. You can now go talk to your friends about all the fun stuff that you've learned. All right, so now we got to get to the actual, what is our forecast, right? That's kind of what we're waiting on. And here we go. So this is the plans, right? So average, these are the average numbers: 14 named storms, 7 hurricanes, and 3 major hurricanes. Has nothing to do with landfall. This is what is normal. 2024, 18, 11, and 5. So all above average. You could kind of say well above average, especially on the major and the hurricanes. Those percentages are pretty high. Named storms, I would say slightly above average. And our forecast for this year, 12 to 17, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 2 to 3 major hurricanes. So we're thinking average on the major side. Hurricanes, we're thinking probably right at average, maybe slightly above average. And then named storms, slightly, really close to average on that one as well, maybe slightly above average on that one. What's funny is we, so a lot of forecasts came out, early in the year, and we did this forecast back in March of this year in Orlando, Florida. It's a great event. If you ever want to be in person for one of these forecast events, you can kind of meet us and ask all your questions. They're really, really good places to come. But we did this forecast, and so if you've noticed, a lot of the other hurricane forecasts, they have dropped their numbers way down from what they originally expected. They were all saying really, really high numbers. Our numbers, we didn't change. This was our forecast 6 months ago or 5 months ago or however long ago it was. And we're still we're feeling pretty good about it right now. So near average to slightly above average is kind of what it looks like. Some bold predictions. Not as active as years past. I don't know if that's a bold prediction, but is a prediction. U.S. landfall hurricane is not a guarantee this year. So it's not a guarantee. We do think there will be 1 to 3 landfalling hurricanes, though, this year. So that could be in the Caribbean. I think there's a higher likelihood that the U.S. will get a landfalling hurricane than they won't. So if you're going 50-50, I would say there's probably, closer to 60 to 70% chance of a landfalling hurricane. But in some of the years past, we've been almost kind of locked in, like it's a for sure deal. Again, last year, what do we have? 5 landfalling hurricanes in the U.S. So, it's not nothing quite as bad as that. The Atlantic has the best odds this season, so we're kind of thinking North Carolina. Maybe something goes up to Long Island. That's probably less likely, but North Carolina's probably got your best shot. And then the Atlantic side of Florida, I would probably tie that area with Louisiana. So if I had to go number one, most likely location, I'm going to go North Carolina coast. Number two, most likely location, I'm probably going to go the Louisiana coast. And then number three would be southern Florida on the Atlantic side coast. That would be my number three, most likely. And then if I had to give you a fourth, I'd probably go Texas as the fourth one. Well, I'm just going to put that twice just to rub it in your face. Not as active as years past. So for those of you, again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed the forecast. I hope it was, I'm only 3 minutes over too, so I'm pretty impressed with that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Again, for those of you that aren't customers, we'd love to have you as a client. We've got 10% off subscription. If you subscribe before Friday, you can scan that QR code. Again, we're going to be here helping you with hurricanes. We're going to be helping you with hailstorms. We're going to be helping you with tornado tracks, anything that is severe weather that unfortunately impacts people and they need help with that recovery effort. We're going to help show you where it was and allow you to go serve your customers better and quicker in doing so. So again, I want to thank everybody for watching. Feel free to post some questions. I can stay on for a few minutes longer and we can ask and answer some questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and while we're waiting for those questions to come in, don't forget to follow us as well. Follow us on all social media sites. We also have a pretty active Facebook group called the Hail Stalkers, so you can find that on our Facebook page as well. And we have a daily noon forecast. So if you want not just the long-term outlook for hurricanes, but also the short term, what's going to happen this afternoon, we have a daily afternoon forecast. And I think that covers it. Gary says thank you. Of course, we appreciate being on here.
And Derik, so while questions are coming in, I am curious to get your thoughts on this, on for what it looks like for contractors, for adjusters, for kind of people who are in these areas after a hurricane to help property owners kind of recover, rebuild. Because really, what are some like the challenges that contractors, adjusters face in some of those moments? Because, for example, a big one that I've seen people talk about is cash flow, right? The claims take much longer. It takes much longer to, there's a lot of damage from some of these type of hurricanes. And having a bigger cash flow compared to working a hailstorm is going to be a big piece to that. So I'm kind of curious on your thoughts on like, from that standpoint, what are some of those challenges?
The cash flow can definitely be one of the bigger ones. You have to know what you can sell and what work you can do, what work you can physically do. So it's amplified more in Florida than some of the other states, but it's also a problem in the other states. Florida, it's amplified more because of the inspection process and the codes that it takes to redo a roof in Florida. They're much more stringent than other states. And so you have to have that cash flow and know that your AR, your accounts receivable, are going to be backed up. It's going to take a while. You can also get that same thing from the insurance carriers too. They get backed up on that stuff as well. It's not like you're talking about a hailstorm where you've got 20 or 30 or 50,000 houses. A lot of times we're talking about close to a million houses that have been the impact number. To be really, really careful with your cash flow. Understand, because when you go into a neighborhood, people are going to be asking you, I need my roof done. I need my roof done. I need my roof done. But you can only do so many roofs. And so you can't rob Peter to pay Paul. So you just have to be careful with that stuff. So great question, Colin. We did get one from Heather here. We've been hearing a lot about the Saharan dust this year. Is there a forecast for that, or can you talk a little bit about it? There is a forecast for it. So it's actually very common. I think the media loves to loves to really dig into the Saharan dust level, dust every year. I like how I said dig in. Anyway, so it's very common, right? So it's basically the air, the winds, the trade wind pattern comes off the desert of like all of northern Africa is essentially just a big desert. And so that dust just kind of comes across. It's really dry air, and so it's not great for hurricanes. You need really moist air for hurricanes. You'll see us even talking about how much dry air comes into a hurricane that will weaken it, or they have the ability to insulate out the dry air. So, but when you have this big shield of dry air moving across the Atlantic Ocean, it kind of trends that away. That's part of the reason why you would see less of that. And there you go. There's Taylor on the spot. What's funny is her name in our private chat is John. So I could have said Johnny on the spot.
John taught me well, but this is your Saharan dust forecast. So yeah, all of this dust comes across the Atlantic Ocean. It's fine right now. It's not very impressive right now. However, come maybe Friday, we may see some, those milky skies that look a little interesting over Florida. Maybe some red sunrises if you look off to the east.
That's really about all it does. It makes you a pretty sunrise, pretty sunset. The sky's a little oranger. The UV might be an 11 instead of a 12. It's still pretty bad in Florida, so it doesn't matter. So that's great for bringing that up. But yeah, it's not great for hurricanes. It typically happens though in July. June and July is when you see it the most. So in August, that'll start to trend back. All right. Well, I think that's it. Yeah. So some great questions. We'll try to monitor this chat too. So if you're watching later, we'll try to monitor that. And Amy will obviously be getting your swag boxes out to the winners. So congratulations to you guys. And thank you so much for watching.
Yeah, thank you for watching.